14 federal investigators found this file. 14. None of them are still here. My name is Marcus Calloway. I worked for the United States government for 23 years. I did not believe in ghosts. I did not believe in the unexplained. I believed in evidence. The evidence destroyed me. Last night, at exactly 2:33 in the morning, something was standing in my room, not outside, not in the hallway, in my room. 6 feet away, breathing. This recording is everything I found, everything they buried, everything that has been happening for 67 years at exactly 2:33 a.m. Listen carefully, because the moment you understand what this is, it will find you too. My name is Marcus Calloway. I am, or I was, a senior investigative analyst with the Office of Anomalous Incident Review, a subdivision of the federal government's interagency oversight apparatus that most people have never heard of, and that, until recently, I would have said produced nothing of consequence. My employee identification number is 007419. My security clearance, at the time of these events, was level 4, with supplementary access to archived materials classified under Executive Order 13526, subsection D, which pertains to incidents deemed unexplained but operationally relevant. I am recording this account on the 14th of April, 2025, at approximately 3:17 in the morning, Eastern Standard Time, from a motel room in Harlan, Kentucky. Although I am no longer confident that the date or the time is accurate, I will explain why. I want to be clear about something before I continue. I am not a paranormal investigator. I have never believed in ghosts. I have never attended a scientiance or visited a psychic. I do not own a Ouija board. For 23 years, I have worked as a federal analyst. And for the first 19 of those years, my work was exactly as mundane as you would imagine it to be. I reviewed incident reports. I cross-referenced witness testimonies with physical evidence. I evaluated the credibility of claims filed by local law enforcement agencies that had, for one reason or another, flagged an event as outside the boundaries of conventional explanation. In the overwhelming majority of cases, I found conventional explanations: carbon monoxide leaks causing hallucinations, sleep deprivation inducing shared psychosis among isolated work crews, infrasound from industrial equipment producing feelings of unease and peripheral visual disturbance, methane pockets in old mines igniting and producing what locals described as lights in the earth. I was good at my job, precisely because I did not believe in the supernatural. I was the person they sent when they needed someone to close a file with a rational conclusion, to stamp it with the appropriate code. Code 7, explained, natural cause, and archive it in a basement in Arlington where no one would ever look at it again. In 23 years, I closed over 400 case files. I received 2 commendations. I trained 11 junior analysts. I wrote the current version of the field manual's chapter on environmental factors and anomalous perception, which is still used in the onboarding process. I mention all of this not to establish credibility in the way a storyteller might, but because I need whoever is listening to this to understand that what I am about to describe did not happen to a person who was predisposed to believe it. It happened to someone who was, in every professional and personal sense, built to resist it. The first case that deviated from my normal assignments came to me in March of 2023. I was in my office in Arlington, a small room on the 3rd floor of a building that did not have a sign on it, and that most of the people who worked in the adjacent buildings assumed had something to do with the General Services Administration. My supervisor at the time was a woman named Dr. Helen Marsh, who had been with the office for 31 years and who shared my skeptical disposition. She was the one who placed the file on my desk, a plain manila folder with a red tab on the upper right corner. A red tab indicated a case that had been previously assigned and returned without resolution, which was unusual. Most cases were resolved or archived as Code 12. Insufficient data. To be returned without any designation was procedurally irregular. And I said as much to Helen. She told me the file had been assigned to an analyst named Peter Callahan, who I knew slightly. He was a quiet man, maybe 10 years younger than me, who had transferred from the FBI's behavioral analysis unit about 5 years earlier. He was competent, methodical, not the sort of person to leave a file in limbo. Helen said he had taken personal leave 3 weeks prior and had not returned. She said it without emphasis, the way you might mention someone had called in with the flu. But I noticed she didn't make eye contact when she said it. I didn't think much of that at the time. People take leave. Analysts burn out. It was not my concern. The file was designated incident 09-7734, and it pertained to a series of events reported at the Greenvale State Psychiatric Hospital in Greenvale, West Virginia. The hospital had been closed since 1991 and had been the subject of intermittent trespassing and vandalism complaints for decades. What made it an anomalous incident file, rather than a simple law enforcement matter, was a report filed by a private security firm that had been contracted by the state to monitor the property after a series of break-ins in late 2022. The security firm Aegis Property Solutions had installed motion-activated cameras throughout the facility's main building. Building A, the former patient ward. They had also assigned a rotating night detail of 2 guards to conduct perimeter checks between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. The report, filed by the firm's regional manager, stated that over a period of 6 weeks, from the 3rd of December, 2022 to the 14th of January, 2023, the motion-activated cameras in building recorded a total of 47 activation events during overnight hours. This alone was not unusual. Animals, settling debris, temperature fluctuations, and equipment malfunction could all trigger motion sensors. What was unusual was that 43 of the 47 activations occurred at the same time, 2:33 a.m., not approximately, not within a window, at exactly 2 minutes and 33 seconds past 2 o'clock in the morning, according to the timestamps embedded in the camera firmware. The 4 remaining activations occurred at other times and were consistent with animal activity. A raccoon was captured in 2 of them, a stray cat in another, and the 4th appeared to be triggered by a piece of ceiling tile falling from a damaged section of corridor. The 43 activations at 2:33 a.m. were different. In each recording, the camera activated and captured between 7 and 12 seconds of footage before automatically shutting off. The footage showed empty corridors, empty rooms, empty stairwells. There was no visible cause for the activation, no animal, no person, no falling debris, but there was, in every single one of the 43 recordings, a visual anomaly. The security firm's report described it as a localized area of reduced luminosity, approximately 3 to 4 feet in diameter, appearing to be positioned roughly 6 feet above the floor surface, present in the frame for the duration of the recording. In other words, a shadow, not cast by anything, not attached to anything, present in different rooms, on different floors, on different cameras, but always at 2:33 a.m., always roughly the same size, always roughly the same height. I want to be precise about what that looks like on camera, because precision matters. I reviewed the recordings myself. They were low resolution, infrared, black and white footage of the sort produced by standard commercial security cameras. In infrared, the image is inverted. Warm objects appear bright. Cold objects appear dark. The corridors of the abandoned hospital, having no heat source, were uniformly cold. So the image was mostly a flat gray, with lighter areas where residual heat from sun-warmed concrete or piping lingered. Against this flat background, the anomaly appeared as a slightly darker region, roughly circular hovering. There is no other word for it, in the center of the frame. It did not move. It did not change shape. It simply existed there for the duration of the recording. And then, when the camera's recording cycle ended, it was gone. When the camera activated again the next night at 2:33 a.m., it appeared again, sometimes in the same room, sometimes in a different one. I noted all of this with professional detachment. My working hypotheses included sensor malfunction in the camera array, a software error producing a recurring artifact at a specific timestamp, or an environmental factor such as a timed heating or cooling event in the building's defunct HVAC system, producing a temperature differential visible on infrared. I drafted a preliminary assessment recommending a technical inspection of the camera equipment and a thermal survey of the building. This was the kind of thing I had done hundreds of times. What gave me pause, and it was only a slight pause, an arrhythmia in the otherwise steady heartbeat of my skepticism, was a note in Peter Callahan's handwriting, clipped to the inside of the file folder. It was on a standard yellow legal pad page, torn along the left edge where it had been pulled from the binding, and it contained 3 lines in Peter's small, precise script. The first line read, 233, consistent across all data. The second line read, not equipment, confirmed with Aegis Tech, cameras replaced twice, anomaly persists. And the third line read, check Hafford, check Marston, check the Wellspring files. I did not know what Hafford, Marston, or the Wellspring files referred to. The names were not in the incident file and did not appear in any cross-reference I could locate through our standard database. I assumed they were case file names or location identifiers from another department, and I made a note to follow up. Then I put the file in my briefcase and drove home and ate dinner and went to bed and did not think about it again until the following Tuesday, when I drove to Greenvale, West Virginia, to conduct my field assessment of the hospital. Greenvale is a town of approximately 800 people in the southern part of the state, situated in a narrow valley between 2 low, heavily forested ridges. The psychiatric hospital sits on a hill at the eastern edge of town, visible from the main road, which is Route 14. The building is a 4-story red brick structure in the Kirkbride style, common to many state psychiatric institutions built in the late 19th century. It was constructed in 1887, expanded in 1923, and again in 1951. At its peak in the 1960s, it housed over 700 patients. By the time it closed in 1991, the patient population had dwindled to fewer than 80, and conditions had deteriorated to a degree that prompted a state investigation. The investigation's findings were sealed, which is itself not unusual for institutional records from that era. But I note it because it means there are aspects of the building's history that are not part of the public record. I arrived at approximately 11:15 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in March. The weather was overcast, temperature around 42 degrees Fahrenheit, with a light wind from the northwest. I met with the Aegis site supervisor, a man named Troy Gaskin, in the parking area adjacent to the building's former main entrance. Gaskin was in his mid-40s, ex-military, based on his bearing and the tattoo visible on his forearm, and he struck me as a straightforward, no-nonsense individual. He unlocked the main entrance and escorted me inside, and I conducted a visual inspection of the ground floor and the camera installation points. The building was in the condition you would expect of a structure that had been closed for over 30 years and only minimally maintained. The floors were covered in a layer of grit and debris. Paint peeled from the walls in long, curling strips. Many of the windows were broken or boarded over. There was a persistent smell of mold and something else underneath it. Something chemical, like old antiseptic, that had soaked into the concrete over decades and continued to leach out. The corridors were long and straight, with patient rooms opening on either side, and they had the particular quality of institutional spaces that were designed to be observed. Every line of sight unobstructed, every corner rounded, every door fitted with a window. I inspected the cameras, which were standard Axis M3045 units mounted at ceiling height on adjustable brackets. Gaskin confirmed Peter Callahan's note. The cameras had been replaced twice after the initial anomaly report, and the anomaly had persisted on the new equipment. I asked Gaskin if he had personally witnessed anything unusual during his time on site, and he said no. Then he corrected himself. He said, well, there was one thing. He told me the night guards, both of whom had since quit, had reported hearing what they described as a rhythmic tapping sound from inside the building during their perimeter rounds. The tapping, they said, occurred between 2 and 3 a.m. and sounded like someone striking a metal surface with a fingertip at regular intervals, once every few seconds. The guards had entered the building twice to investigate and found nothing, and the tapping had stopped as soon as they opened the exterior door. Both guards had quit within a week of each other in late January. I asked Gaskin what he thought caused the camera activations. He looked at me for a long moment before saying, "I don't think about it." He said it in a way that suggested he had thought about it and had decided to stop. I spent the rest of the afternoon completing my technical assessment. I found no evidence of HVAC activity, no timed systems of any kind still operative in the building, no electromagnetic interference from external sources, and no equipment malfunction that could account for the precise, recurring timestamp of the activations. The cameras were functioning correctly. The motion sensors were calibrated within normal parameters. I could not reproduce the anomaly during daylight hours, or when I stayed past sunset and monitored the feed until approximately 8 p.m. during early evening hours. I left the site before 2:33 a.m. because my assessment protocol did not require overnight observation. And at that stage of the investigation, I did not believe overnight observation was warranted. I filed my preliminary field report the following day. In it, I noted the absence of a conventional explanation, but recommended extended monitoring with upgraded equipment, including thermal imaging cameras and an audio recording array, before drawing any conclusions. It was a professional, measured, unremarkable document. I would later come to think of it as the last normal thing I wrote. The second case arrived in my queue 11 days later. This one had not been previously assigned. It was new, flagged by the FBI field office in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and forwarded to our office through the standard interagency routing protocol. It was designated Incident 11-2206, and it pertained to a series of events at the Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola, the largest maximum security prison in the United States. Angola occupies 18,000 acres in a bend of the Mississippi River in West Feliciana Parish, Louisiana. The facility houses approximately 6,300 inmates and has been in continuous operation since 1901. The portion of the facility relevant to the incident was Camp J, a restricted housing unit used for disciplinary segregation. Camp J consists of a series of single occupancy cells in a two-tier arrangement, with concrete walls, steel doors, and a narrow central corridor on each tier. It is one of the most controlled and monitored environments in the American penal system. Every cell is observed by camera, every corridor is patrolled at 30-minute intervals, and every sound above a whisper can be heard by the guards stationed at the tier control desk. The incident report described a series of complaints from inmates housed on J Tier -2, the upper tier of Camp J, over a period of approximately 3 weeks in February and early March 2023. The complaints were filed through the standard institutional grievance process and were initially handled by the facility's Internal Affairs Division before being elevated to the FBI field office by the prison warden, a man I will call Warden Thibodeau, because I am not certain of the regulations regarding the use of his real name in an informal recording of this nature. The complaints were notable for 2 reasons. First, they were filed independently by 9 different inmates who had no communication with each other. Disciplinary segregation in Camp J prohibits all inter-inmate contact, and the cells are soundproof to a degree that makes shouting between them extremely difficult. Second, the complaints describe substantially the same phenomenon, a presence in the cell during nighttime hours. I have copies of several of the grievance forms in my files. I will read from one of them, filed by an inmate identified by his prison number. 09-1147, a man serving a life sentence for second-degree murder who had been in Camp J for approximately 7 months for an assault on another inmate. His handwriting was rough but legible, and his complaint read as follows. Something comes into my cell between 2 and 3 in the morning. The door does not open. The camera light does not change. But something is in the cell with me. I can feel it standing near the foot of my bed. I cannot see it, but the dark is different where it stands. The dark is heavier, It does not move. I lay still and do not breathe until it leaves. When it leaves, I do not know because I do not see it go. I look, and the dark is normal again. This happens every night. I am not sleeping. I need to be moved to a different tier. I am not making this up. And I am not crazy. I did what I did, and I'm serving my time. But this is something else. The other complaints varied in detail, but shared the same essential elements. A presence, felt but not seen, occurring during the early morning hours, associated with an area of unusual darkness. Several inmates described the darkness as having a physical quality, as though it occupied space. One described it as a place in the room where the air is thicker. Another said it was like looking at a hole, but the hole is standing up. None of the inmates used the word ghost, or spirit, or demon. They described it in physical, spatial terms, as a thing that was present in their environment, an object of sorts. Not a visitation. The prison's camera system recorded nothing unusual. The cell door log showed no unauthorized openings. The guard patrol log showed no anomalies, although one guard, a corrections officer named Daniel Picard, had submitted a separate report noting that, on 3 occasions during his overnight shifts in February, the fluorescent lights on J-tier -2 had dimmed briefly at what he described as around 2:30 in the morning. The dimming lasted approximately 5 to 7 seconds and was not accompanied by any electrical fault indicator on the tier's breaker panel. Picard's report was filed as a maintenance request and was in the process of being investigated by the facility's electrical contractor when the FBI field office intervened. I traveled to Angola on the 2nd of April. The trip required coordination with the Louisiana Department of Public Safety and Corrections, which added several days to my timeline. And I remember being mildly irritated by the bureaucratic delay, because I was trying to clear my caseload before a scheduled vacation in May. I mention this to illustrate my state of mind at the time, which was that of a person who viewed this case as a professional obligation, not a mystery, and who was more concerned with his personal calendar than with the content of the investigation. That would change. Warden Thibodeau met me at the facility's administration building and provided me with access to the relevant records, camera footage, grievance files, and personnel logs. He was a large, deliberate man who chose his words carefully and who, I gathered, was deeply uncomfortable with the FBI's involvement, and even more uncomfortable with mine. He told me that in 30 years of correctional work, he had never seen anything he couldn't explain, and that he expected me to find the explanation. I told him I expected the same. I spent 2 days reviewing the camera footage from J-tier -2 for the period covered by the complaints. The footage was higher quality than the Greenvale recordings. Angola's system used modern high-definition cameras with constant recording, not motion-activated. I reviewed the footage frame by frame for the overnight hours, focusing on the 2 o'clock to 3 a.m. window. The footage showed exactly what you would expect. Still, gray images of men lying on bunks in small concrete rooms, some sleeping, some staring at the ceiling, all of them motionless. There were no visible anomalies, no shadows, no distortions, no inexplicable darkness, except in one recording. Cell 2 to 14, occupied by inmate 09-1147. The man whose grievance I read earlier, on the recording dated the 22nd of February at 2:33 a.m. And I need to be clear about this because when I saw the timestamp, I felt something cold move through my chest, a physical sensation I had never experienced in connection with my work. At 2:33 a.m., the camera feed for cell 2 to 14 exhibited a visual anomaly lasting approximately 9 seconds. The image did not distort. There was no static, no dropout, no compression artifact. What happened was simpler than that, and more difficult to explain. For 9 seconds, a portion of the image became darker, not uniformly, and not in a way that suggested a lighting change. A region in the lower right area of the frame, corresponding to the space near the foot of the inmate's bunk, became several shades darker than the surrounding image. It was exactly the kind of thing you might not notice if you weren't looking for it. If you were scrubbing through hours of overnight footage at high speed, you would miss it entirely. But I was looking, and I saw it, and it was at 2:33 a.m. I checked the footage from other cells on J-tier -2 for the same timestamp. I checked the 22nd of February 1st, then every night for the full 3-week complaint period. In most recordings, there was nothing. But on 7 of the 21 nights in various cells at 2:33 a.m., I found the same anomaly, a region of deepened darkness, lasting between 7 and 12 seconds, positioned approximately 6 feet above the floor, in the portion of the cell furthest from the camera. The same size, the same duration range, the same height. The same time, I sat in the reviewing room in Angola's administration building with my hands on the desk, and I thought about Greenvale. I thought about a shadow on a camera in an abandoned hospital in West Virginia, appearing at 2:33 a.m., roughly 3 to 4 feet in diameter, roughly 6 feet above the floor. And I thought about a shadow on a camera in a maximum security prison in Louisiana, appearing at 2:33 a.m., roughly the same size, roughly the same height. And I thought about the distance between those two places, over 800 miles. And about the fact that the events overlapped in time, some of the Angola recordings occurring on the same dates as the Greenvale recordings. Whatever was being captured on these cameras, if it was the same phenomenon, it was not something that traveled from one location to the other. It was present in both locations simultaneously, or it was present in neither, and the correlation was coincidental. I chose to believe the latter. That was easier. I interviewed inmate 09-1147 on my second day at Angola. The interview took place in a visitation room adjacent to Camp J, a bare room with a table and 2 chairs bolted to the floor, and a camera in the upper corner. The inmate was a man in his late 40s, heavy-set, with a calm demeanor that I would not have expected from someone who had filed a complaint about a nocturnal presence in his cell. He was not agitated. He was not frightened. He spoke about the experience the way you might describe a leak in your roof, as a problem that needed to be addressed, not a crisis. I asked him to describe the experience in as much detail as he could. He repeated the account from his grievance form, adding that the presence had appeared every night without exception from approximately the 5th of February through approximately the 1st of March, and then had stopped. I asked him why he thought it had stopped, and he said he didn't know. I asked him if anything else unusual had occurred during the same period, and he thought about it and said that on one occasion he could not remember the exact date, but he thought it was around the middle of February he had heard a sound. Not from outside the cell, and not from the ventilation system, which was the only source of ambient noise and segregation. The sound, he said, came from the dark place, from the area near the foot of his bunk, where the darkness was heavier. He described it as breathing. Not labored breathing, not rasping, not wheezing. Just breathing, steady, measured, quiet breathing, as though someone were standing there in perfect stillness, doing nothing but breathing. I asked him if the breathing sounded human. He looked at me for what felt like a long time. Then he said, it sounded like someone learning how. I did not include that statement in my official report. I do not know why. I think, perhaps, it disturbed me in a way that I was not prepared to acknowledge, and omitting it was a way of maintaining my distance from the material. This was a mistake, but it was not the last one. I returned to Arlington on the 5th of April, and spent the next week writing my field report on the Angola case. In the process, I pulled the Greenvale file again, and placed the two side by side on my desk. I stared at them for a long time. The correlation was statistically improbable, but statistics apply to random events, and I had no way of determining whether these events were random. I could not rule out coincidence. I could not confirm it either. I was in the uncomfortable position of having data that pointed toward a connection. I could not justify pursuing within the scope of either individual case file. It was at this point that I remembered Peter Callahan's note. Check Hafford. Check Marston. Check the Wellspring files. I had never followed up on it, and now the note sat at the edge of my consciousness like a word on the tip of my tongue. I went to our archive database and searched for each name. Halford returned no results. Marston returned no results. Wellspring returned a single result, a cross-reference notation in a legacy database that our office had inherited from a predecessor agency, the Office of Scientific Intelligence, a CIA subdivision that had been dissolved in 1963. The notation was not a case file. It was an index entry, a single line that read, Wellspring, see, Project Sable, 1958 in 1961, Archive Box 1172, Vault 7. I had access to Vault 7, which was a storage facility in a sub-basement of our building that contained archived materials from various defunct intelligence programs. I had been in it twice in my career, both times to retrieve mundane records for a historical audit. I submitted an access request the following morning. 2 days later, I was sitting at a metal table in Vault 7 with Archive Box 1172 in front of me. The box was a standard government records container, gray cardboard, with a typed label reading Project Sable, OCI, Records Group 14. Inside were approximately 400 pages of documents, some typed, some handwritten in varying states of preservation. Many had been redacted, and some had been redacted so heavily that entire pages were solid black. But enough remained to assemble a general picture. Project Sable was an investigation conducted by the Office of Scientific Intelligence between 1958 and 1961. Its stated purpose, according to a memorandum dated the 4th of June, 1958, and signed by a name that had been redacted, was the systematic collection and analysis of reports pertaining to anomalous perceptual phenomena occurring in government controlled facilities. In plain language, it was an investigation into what we would now call paranormal activity in federal buildings, military installations, and government-contracted sites. The project had been initiated in response to a cluster of reports from personnel at various facilities describing unusual sensory experiences, visual disturbances, auditory phenomena, and what the memorandum delicately referred to as a subjective impression of non-solitary presence in confirmed vacant spaces. The project's case files were organized by location, and there were 11 of them. Most were heavily redacted, but the 3 that remained substantially intact were enough to stop me cold. The first was a report from a military hospital at Fort Detrick, Maryland, dated September 1958. The report described a recurring visual anomaly observed on the facility's closed-circuit television system, which at that time used early-generation vacuum tube cameras installed for security monitoring. The anomaly was described as a localized darkening of the image, roughly spherical, approximately 90 centimeters in diameter, appearing at a height consistent with human head level, recurring at irregular intervals during late-night monitoring periods. The report noted that the anomaly had been observed on cameras in different wings of the hospital on different nights. It had been reviewed by the facility's electronics maintenance team, who found no equipment fault. A handwritten annotation in the margin of the report, in a different hand than the main text, read, Recurrence time consistent 0233 HRS. The second substantially intact file was from a decommissioned naval facility on the coast of Maine. A facility I will not name because it is still listed as a classified installation, despite having been closed since 1972. The report, dated March 1960, described acoustic anomalies detected by passive sonar equipment that was being used for a research project unrelated to Project Sable. The sonar had detected a rhythmic low-frequency signal originating from within the facility's main building, not from the ocean, not from any mechanical source, but from inside a concrete structure. The signal occurred between 02:00 and 03:00 hours and was described as consistent with biological respiration patterns, but at an amplitude and frequency inconsistent with human or known animal respiratory function. A notation in the file indicated that the signal's peak intensity had been recorded at 0233 hours on 3 of the 5 nights it was monitored. The third file was labeled Wellspring, and it was not a case file at all. It was a summary memorandum, dated December 1961, apparently written as a final report before the project's termination. It was 2 pages long and had been redacted less heavily than the other documents. perhaps because it was a summary rather than a source document. I will read from it as faithfully as I can reconstruct from my notes, because the original is still in the archive box, and I do not have it with me. The memorandum began. The phenomenon designated wellspring has been identified in 11 separate locations across 8 states, and 1 overseas installation. Despite significant variation in local conditions, environmental factors, and the nature of the facilities involved, the phenomenon presents a consistent core profile. It manifests primarily as a visual anomaly, a bounded region of reduced luminosity, and secondarily as an acoustic anomaly, a low-frequency rhythmic signal consistent with respiratory function. Both manifestations occur during a narrow temporal window centered on 0233 hours local time. The phenomenon does not appear to be electromagnetic, biological, or mechanical in origin. It does not correlate with any known environmental factor. It has been observed on multiple sensor modalities, including optical cameras, infrared sensors, and passive acoustic arrays. It has been reported subjectively by human observers as a sensation of non-solitary presence. The memorandum continued. Most significantly, the phenomenon does not appear to be geographically fixed. It is manifested at installations separated by thousands of miles, in some cases on the same day. This suggests either multiple independent sources or a single source with characteristics not consistent with any known physical phenomenon. The project team has been unable to determine which interpretation is correct. And then the memorandum concluded with a paragraph that I read 3 times before I was certain I was reading it correctly. It said, of the 6 OSI analysts assigned to Project Sable between June 1958 and December 1961, 4 have separated from service under medical or administrative provisions. 2 of these, names redacted, have not been located since their separation. The project is recommended for immediate termination. All materials are to be archived under restricted access. No further investigation is recommended. Addendum handwritten, different ink. Possibly added at a later date. The wellspring does not stay in the walls. It follows the questions. I sat in Vault 7 for a very long time after reading that. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed. The air smelled like old paper and dust. The silence in a sub-basement archive is a particular kind of silence. It is the silence of things that have been deliberately put away, sealed, forgotten. I thought about Peter Callahan, who had read this file, or some version of it, and had then taken personal leave and not returned. I thought about the 6 OSI analysts, 4 of whom had left the service, 2 of whom had not been located. I thought about 2:33 a.m. Then I gathered my notes, went upstairs, and told Helen Marsh that I needed to see every case file from the past 10 years that contained any reference to a recurring anomaly at or near 2:33 hours. She gave me a look I had never seen from her before. It was not surprise. It was not concern. It was recognition. She nodded once and told me to check the restricted archive filing cabinet 7, drawer 3. She said she would clear the access for me. She said it as though she had been waiting for me to ask. Filing cabinet 7, drawer 3 contained 9 case files, spanning the years 2014 to 2022. Different analysts, different regions, different types of locations. Each one documented an anomalous incident that included, among other details, a reference to 2:33 hours. I took the entire drawer to my desk, and I began to read. What I found in those files is what I am going to describe now. Case by case, because each one added a layer to a picture that I did not want to see clearly. But that was becoming impossible to ignore. The first of the 9 files was Incident 06-3318, dated August 2014. It concerned a stretch of Route 117 in northern Montana, a 2-lane road that runs through approximately 40 miles of uninhabited grassland between the towns of Hinsdale and Offline, near the Canadian border. The area is remote in the most literal sense of the word. There are no structures, no cell towers, no artificial light sources of any kind along this stretch. At night, the darkness is total. The file had been opened based on a series of reports from the Montana Highway Patrol regarding vehicle incidents on Route 117 during overnight hours. Between May and July 2014, 4 vehicles had been found abandoned on or near the road during early morning patrols. In each case, the vehicle was found with its engine running, headlights on, driver's door open, and no occupant. In 3 of the 4 cases, the driver was eventually located. 2 were found walking along the road in a disoriented state. Anand was found in a field approximately half a mile from the vehicle, sitting in the grass, unresponsive. The 4th driver was never found. Her vehicle, a 2011 Honda Civic registered to a woman named Laura Chen, age 34, was found at approximately mile marker 27 at 5:47 a.m. on the 19th of June, 2014. Engine running, headlights on, driver's door open, her purse phone, and shoes still inside. The 3 drivers who were recovered gave statements to the highway patrol that were, on the surface, not particularly unusual for people found in disoriented states on remote roads at night. One said he had stopped because he saw an animal in the road, and then couldn't remember what happened next. One said she had felt suddenly ill and stepped out of the car for air, and then became confused about where she was. The 3rd, the man found in the field, said nothing at all for several hours after being recovered. And then, when he did speak, he said only this: he had needed to get out of the car because something was in the car with me. The case had been investigated by the Montana Highway Patrol and then referred to us after an MHP officer, a sergeant named Anna Kowalski, noticed something in the onboard dashcam recordings. Her report described the following. On the dashcam recording from May 11th, 2014, as the patrol vehicle approached the first abandoned car at approximately 3:15 a.m., the dashcam recorded a visual anomaly in the road approximately 50 yards ahead. She described it as an area of darkness on the road surface that did not correspond to any object or shadow source. The anomaly was visible for approximately 4 seconds as the patrol vehicle approached, and then disappeared as the vehicle reached the location. Ambient conditions, clear sky, half-moon should have provided sufficient illumination for the dashcam to produce a consistent image. The darkened area did not correspond to a dip in the road, an overpass shadow, or any other physical feature. The analyst who had been assigned this case, a man named David Forsyth, who I knew had retired in 2016, had reviewed the dashcam recording and noted the anomaly, but had not connected it to anything else. His report concluded with the code 12, insufficient data. No further action recommended, but in the file's appendix, where analysts sometimes include informal working notes, Forsyth had written a single line. The dashcam timestamp at the moment of the visual anomaly reads 3 hours, 15 minutes, and 0 seconds, but the vehicle's GPS log, which uses a different time source, records the vehicle's position at that location at 2 hours, 33 minutes, and 0 seconds local time. There is a 42-minute discrepancy between the dashcam clock and the GPS clock. I have confirmed that the GPS clock is synchronized with NIST atomic time. The dashcam clock is 42 minutes fast. The anomaly occurred at 2:33. He had underlined it. Then, in a different pen at a later date, he had added, "I don't know what this means." Neither did I, but I noted it and moved on to the next file. Incident 07-5512, dated March 2017. Harrogate Estate, in the Hudson Valley region of New York State, approximately 90 miles north of Manhattan. The estate had been built in 1889 by an industrialist named Clement Harrogate and had remained in the family until 2003, when the last surviving Harrogate, a woman named Edith, had died at the age of 91. The property had been purchased by a real estate development firm with the intention of converting it into a boutique hotel. But renovation work had been halted in 2016 after a series of incidents involving the construction crew. The file contained a report from the development firm's project manager, a man named James Okafor. Beginning in January 2016, members of the renovation crew working late shifts in the mansion's east wing reported a persistent feeling of being watched. This alone would not have warranted a case file. What elevated the Harrogate case to anomalous status was a series of audio recordings. The renovation crew's foreman, a man named Rick Dutton, had installed a baby monitor in the East Wing as an informal security measure. A standard consumer audio device, continuous recording, base unit in the ballroom, receiver in the crew's break room in the detached carriage house. Over several weeks, Dutton and other crew members heard sounds on the monitor that they could not attribute to any source. The sounds were faint and intermittent, initially dismissed as ambient noise wind. Animals, settling of the old structure. But on the night of the 3rd of February 2016, at approximately 2:30 a.m., Dutton was alone in the carriage house break room. He heard something different, and he began recording. The recording was included in the case file as an audio attachment. I listened to it in my office with headphones on. It was approximately 14 minutes long. For the first 2 minutes, there was nothing but the ambient hiss of the baby monitor's open microphone. A faint static, the kind of white noise that becomes almost inaudible when you listen long enough. Then, beginning at the 2:12 mark, which corresponds to approximately 2:33 a.m., there was a sound. I have listened to thousands of audio recordings in my career. I have heard sounds misidentified as voices, footsteps, breathing, music. In every case, I have been able to identify the actual source, or at minimum, the acoustic characteristics that made the sound susceptible to misidentification. The sound on Dutton's recording did not fall into any of those categories. It was a voice. I am not speculating. I am not interpreting ambiguous audio. It was a human voice, or something very close to a human voice speaking at a low volume from what sounded like a moderate distance from the microphone. The voice had a quality I can only describe as slightly out of register, as though a recording of a voice were being played back at a speed that was almost but not quite correct. A subtle distortion in pitch, in cadence. The voice spoke for approximately 40 seconds, paused, then spoke again for approximately 20 seconds, and then fell silent. The remaining 10 minutes of the recording contained nothing but ambient noise. I listened to the vocal segments repeatedly, adjusting the playback speed. In the equalization, trying to isolate the words, most of it remained unintelligible. But in the second segment, there was a phrase I was able to make out with reasonable confidence. After multiple listenings, the voice said, and I want to be careful here, because audio interpretation is inherently subjective, and I am aware that my subsequent experiences may have influenced my perception. The voice said what sounded like, "You are not the first," or it might have said, "You are not the worst," or "You are not dispersed." The sibilants were unclear. The vowels were slightly off, but the cadence was unmistakable. It was a short declarative sentence, in English spoken by something that was using language, whether or not it was using it naturally. Okafor's report noted that Dutton had quit the renovation project the following week, and that 2 other crew members had quit within the month. The development firm suspended the renovation indefinitely, and eventually sold the property. The analyst assigned to the case, Dr. Priya Mehta, visited the site, conducted an audio survey, but was unable to reproduce the phenomenon. Her report concluded with code 12. Insufficient data, but it included a detailed acoustic analysis, confirming that the recording contained vocalizations not attributable to any identified environmental source. In her working notes, Mehta wrote, "If I were not constrained by methodology, I would say that the recording captures a voice that is present in the room and aware of the recording device. I am constrained by methodology, so I will say instead that the recording is anomalous, but I want it on record that I considered the former interpretation. And I also want it on record that the clearest vocalization occurs at a point in the recording corresponding to approximately 2:33 hours. Dr. Priya Mehta resigned from the office in June 2017, 3 months after submitting her report. I checked the personnel records. Her resignation letter was a single sentence. I am no longer confident in my ability to evaluate these materials objectively. There was no forwarding address. I need to pause here and describe my state of mind at this point, because it matters. I was not frightened. I was not anxious. I was not experiencing what a psychologist would call an acute stress reaction. What I was experiencing was something more subtle, and in retrospect, more dangerous. I was becoming interested. The pattern was there, 2:33 a.m., the shadow, the breathing, the voice, and it was consistent across locations, across years, across independent witnesses and analysts who had no contact with each other. My professional training told me this was one of 3 things: an extraordinary coincidence, a systemic flaw in our data collection, or evidence of something outside the boundaries of what I understood. The first was implausible. The second was possible, but required a mechanism I could not identify. The third, I was not ready to accept, but I could no longer dismiss it, so I continued. Through the files, incident 08-0041, dated October 2018 location, the MV Caledonia, a decommissioned research vessel owned by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, moored at a maintenance dock in Bayou La Batre, Alabama. The Caledonia had once been an oceanographic survey ship. By 2005, it had been decommissioned, and now it sat there, rusting, waiting for disposal that never seemed to come. The ship was not crewed, not maintained, not visited, except by a dockyard watchman who checked the mooring lines once a week. The case began when that watchman, Albert Solo, filed a report claiming the ship was occupied. He was 67 years old. He had worked at the dockyard for over 20 years, and he reported that on 3 consecutive Thursday nights, he saw lights inside the Caledonia. The ship's power had been disconnected years earlier, but through the portholes, he could see a faint, steady, cold illumination, like moonlight. Except it was coming from inside the ship. On the 3rd night, he boarded the vessel. He walked through the upper decks with a flashlight. He found no one, no light source, but he heard something from below decks, a sound he described as someone breathing through a pipe. Noah referred the case to us as a formality. The assigned analyst was a man I will call Thompson. Thompson conducted a full inspection, installed infrared cameras, temperature loggers, and audio recorder, and left them running for 7 nights. On nights 1, 2, 3, and 5, nothing. But on night 4, Thursday at exactly 2:33 a.m., the infrared camera captured it. A shadow, a bounded region of reduced luminosity, roughly spherical, 3 to 4 feet in diameter, hovering 6 feet above the deck, visible for 11 seconds. Night 6 again, Thursday 2:33 a.m. Same anomaly. Different camera. 9 seconds. Samey characteristics. Night 7, the audio recorder captured something. At 2:33 a.m., a low frequency, rhythmic sound, consistent with breathing. Duration, 45 seconds. Thompson noted something critical. The sound was not traveling through the air. It was moving through the ship itself, through the metal, the structure, as if whatever was producing it was in contact with the vessel. His official report concluded, Code 12, insufficient data, but his personal notes told a different story. The 12th of October, reviewed night 4 footage for the 6th time. The anomaly is at 2:33. Greenvale 2:33. Fort Detrick 2:33. This is the same phenomenon. across decades, across locations, across every sensor we have. The 14th of October, I have been thinking about the voice on the Harrogate recording. You are not the first. If that is what it said, it wasn't talking to Dutton. It was talking to whoever was listening. To Meta, or whoever came after. I think it was talking to me. The 15th of October, I woke at 2:33 this morning. Hotel room, Bayula Baytre. I woke instantly. Certain I was not alone. Turned on the light, room was empty, but the bathroom door, which I know I left open, was closed. The 16th of October. Final entry, I am going back to the ship tonight. I need to see it myself. Not on camera, in person. I need to stand where it appears and look at it directly. The protocol does not apply here. This does not stay where you find it. I think it has already left the ship. The sentence ends there. Midline. No period. No conclusion. Just absence. Thompson was reported missing the next day. His hotel room was found intact. Wallet, keys, phone, all inside. His car. Still in the dockyard, the equipment was recovered. Thompson was never found. Official determination, unexplained absence, no evidence of foul play. I sat with Thompson's file for a long time. I want to say I remained professionally detached. I want to say I processed the information as data points and moved methodically to the next file. But that would not be honest. And whatever value this recording has depends on honesty, because the facts I am describing are unbelievable enough without my attempting to refine them. The truth is that when I read Thompson's final note, I think it has already left the ship. I felt something shift in the room around me. Not a physical sensation. Not a draft. Not a sound. Something subtler than that. A change in the quality of my attention. As if a part of my mind had been redirected, without permission, towards something I could not identify. I was sitting in my office in Arlington, in the middle of the afternoon, surrounded by filing cabinets and fluorescent lights, and the distant, muffled movement of other people working. And I understood, for the first time in my career, that the space I occupied was not entirely mine. I made myself continue. The remaining files followed the same essential pattern. I will summarize them more briefly, not because they are less important, but because the details, while individually distinct, converge toward the same conclusion. And I do not want to obscure that shape with unnecessary detail. Incident 08-4490, February 2019. A former juvenile detention facility in rural Oregon, closed for 5 years. A historical society granted access for cataloging. Volunteers reported rhythmic breathing during evening work sessions. An unattended overnight recording captured vocalization at 2:33 a.m. Spectral analysis showed frequency components inconsistent with any known biological source. The assigned analyst completed her report, then requested transfer. Approved immediately. She remains employed within the federal system. She has declined all further discussion of the case. Incident 09-1177, November 2019. A lighthouse on a small island off the coast of Maine. Automated since 1983. No permanent staff. A Coast Guard maintenance crew discovered anomalous barometric readings recorded at 2:33 a.m. every night for approximately 3 months. Each reading showed a sudden drop in pressure, approximately 0.3 millibars, lasting between 7 and 12 seconds. Too small to be meteorologically significant, too consistent to be instrument error. Inside the lamp room, markings were found scratched into the wall. Vertical lines, tally-like in structure, 33 clusters, each cluster containing 2 marks. 2:33. Incident 10-0560, June 2020. A closed wing of a Veterans Affairs hospital in Pennsylvania. Night staff reported peripheral shadows and intermittent dimming of lights during the 2:03 a.m. window. Security footage captured the familiar anomaly at 2:33 a.m. The assigned analyst, Robert Ellison, conducted a 2-week investigation. His final report was not a report in any conventional sense. It was a narrative, a journal. By page 30, it stopped being observational and became interpretive. He wrote, "I have reviewed the collected evidence from this case and from 6 prior cases held in the restricted archive. The consistency of the phenomenon, its temporal signature, its physical characteristics, its behavior on multiple sensor modalities, compels a conclusion I am no longer able to avoid. This is a single phenomenon. It is present in multiple locations. It recurs with precision. It responds to observation. And it persists not in the locations where it is observed, but in the observation itself. The act of investigating this phenomenon appears to be a vector for its propagation, like an afterimage that remains when you look away. Except the afterimage, in this case, is not in your eyes. It is in your life," he continued. "I am aware of Thompson's disappearance. I am aware of Meta's resignation. I am aware of similar outcomes in earlier cases. I have added my name to what I now understand to be a list. I do not believe I can remove it. I believe the following to be true, although I cannot prove it. The phenomenon does not haunt locations. It haunts understanding. It exists in the space between question and answer. When you ask what it is, you create room for it. I am writing this because I believe a record should exist, even if the record becomes another vector. Simona will read this. Simona will recognize the pattern, and the pattern will recognize them." Ellison submitted his report on the 30th of June, 2020. He did not come to work on the 1st of July. His home was undisturbed. His car remained in the garage. His phone was on the kitchen table. His laptop was open on his desk. A blank document on screen. A single blinking cursor. He has not been seen since. I read his report without stopping. When I finished, it was dark outside my office window. I had lost track of time. That was unusual for me. I am a person who is normally aware of the hour, a habit formed through years of field work where timing matters. I checked my watch. 9:47 p.m. I had been reading for over 6 hours without noticing. The building was empty. The hallway lights were set to overnight dim. The HVAC system hummed steadily. Nothing else. I packed the files into my briefcase and left. My footsteps in the parking garage echoed more sharply than they should have. At some point, I realized I was walking faster than intended, without having decided to. I drove home. I ate a meal I do not remember preparing. I went to bed. I woke at 2:33 a.m. I want to be very precise about this. I did not wake gradually. I did not transition through a period of light sleep into wakefulness. I went from being completely unconscious to being completely awake in a single instant, as though someone had thrown a switch. I was lying on my back, which is not my usual sleeping position. My eyes were open. The room was dark, and I knew, not suspected, not feared, but knew with the same certainty with which I know my own name, that there was something in the room with me. I lay still. My heart rate was elevated. But I was not panicking. I was in that moment an investigator, and I was observing. The room was dark, but not uniformly so. There was a faint glow from the power strip behind my dresser, and a slightly less faint glow from the digital clock on my bedside table, which I deliberately did not look at because I already knew what time it would read. In the ambient dimness, I could see the outlines of my furniture, the rectangle of the window, and the vertical line of the closet door, which I always leave open because I have a minor and irrational aversion to closed closet doors, a residue of childhood. The closet door was closed. I watched the closed closet door for what felt like a very long time. Nothing happened. No sound, no movement, no deeper darkness, no breathing, no voice. And then, this is difficult to describe, because it was not a visual event, but something more like a visual absence. I became aware that the darkness in the corner of the room nearest the closet was not the same as the darkness everywhere else. It was the same color, the same depth, but it occupied space differently. It had a quality of density, of intention, as though the darkness in that corner were not merely the absence of light, but the presence of something else. Something that was using the darkness the way a person uses clothing. I lay still for 11 minutes. I know this because I eventually gave in and looked at the clock, and it read 2:44. Then I turned on the bedside lamp. The room was empty. The closet door was open. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time after that. I was not frightened. I was recalibrating. Something in my understanding of the world had been adjusted, not dramatically. Not all at once, but in the way a bone is reset after a fracture. Painfully necessarily, and with the knowledge that the structure will never be exactly as it was before. The next morning, I went to the office and requested all remaining files related to the 0233 phenomenon. Helen Marsh did not ask why. She gave me access to everything. I think she understood what was happening, and I think she had been watching it happen to the others before me. To Thompson, to Ellison, to Mehta, to Callahan, to Forsyth. And I think she had made a decision at some point not to look at the files herself, because she understood what looking at them meant. She was protecting herself by not understanding. This was, I realize now, the only effective defense anyone had found. But it was not one I was willing to adopt, because I had already looked, and I had already begun to understand. And understanding, once started, is a process that does not reverse. Over the next 3 weeks, I did something that no previous analyst had done as far as I could determine from the records. I compiled every data point from every case. Greenvale, Angola, Route 117, Harrogate, the Caledonia, the Oregon facility, the main lighthouse, the VA hospital, the Project Sable files, and 3 additional cases I found through cross-referencing that had been misfiled in unrelated archives. And I built a comprehensive database. I logged every timestamp, every witness description, every audio anomaly, every visual signature, every environmental reading, every piece of testimony. I created a timeline. I mapped the locations. I ran statistical analyses on the data. What emerged was a picture of something that behaved like no phenomenon I had ever studied, and like no phenomenon I had ever heard described in any scientific or pseudoscientific literature. The entity, and I will call it that from this point forward, because there is no more accurate term available to me, did not behave like a haunting. It did not attach to a location, a building, an object, or a person. It appeared in locations that had no geographical, historical, or architectural commonality. An asylum in West Virginia, a prison in Louisiana, a road in Montana, a mansion in New York, a ship in Alabama, a detention facility in Oregon, a lighthouse in Maine, a hospital in Pennsylvania, a military installation in Maryland. These places had nothing in common except that someone, at some point, had observed something anomalous in them, and in every case, the anomaly had the same temporal signature, 2:33 a.m. The statistical probability of this occurring by chance across 13 independent cases was vanishingly small. The probability of 13 independent events all occurring at the same minute of a 1,440-minute day is, assuming uniform random distribution, approximately 1 in 1.69 circumflex 41. This is a number so large that it effectively excludes coincidence. Something was causing these events to occur at the same time, either a single thing manifesting simultaneously across vast distances, or a rule governing the behavior of multiple things that produced identical temporal patterns. I could not determine which, and it may not matter. What I could determine, and what frightened me more than the entity itself, was the pattern of what happened to the people who studied it. I compiled a list of every analyst, investigator, security guard, witness, or other individual who had not merely encountered the phenomenon, but had actively investigated it, had looked at the recordings, read the files, cross-referenced the data, and begun to form an understanding of the pattern. The list contained 14 names. Of these 14, 3 had resigned. 2 had requested transfers. 4 had disappeared, vanished completely, leaving behind personal belongings, vehicles, and no evidence of voluntary departure or foul play. 2 had suffered psychological episodes that resulted in hospitalization and their medical records, which I should not have accessed, but did describe symptoms consistent with acute dissociative states. The remaining 3 were listed as current status unknown in our personnel system, which meant the office had lost track of them entirely. 14 people. Not a single one had continued working in the field after engaging deeply with this material. Not a single one was, as far as I could determine, currently living a normal life. The phenomenon was not just present in the places where it was observed. It was present in the people who observed it. And it was not passive. It was progressive. The deeper you looked, the closer it came, the more you understood, the less of your own life remained separate from it. I want to describe what happened during the 3 weeks I spent building the database, because the events of that period are relevant to the question of whether what I am reporting is the product of a deteriorating mind or a genuine anomalous phenomenon. I am aware that from the outside, the two may look the same. I can only tell you what I experienced and let you decide. During the first week, nothing unusual occurred. I worked normal office hours, reviewed files, entered data into my spreadsheet, and went home each evening to my apartment in Arlington. I slept normally. I ate normally. I did not wake at 2:33 a.m. again. I began to think that my experience in the bedroom had been a hypnagogic episode, a waking dream essentially, triggered by the suggestive content of the case files. This was a comforting explanation, and I wanted to believe it. During the second week, I noticed minor discrepancies. The first was on a Tuesday. I arrived at my office to find that the files I had been reviewing the previous day were arranged on my desk in a slightly different order than I had left them. The Greenvale file, which I was certain I had placed on the left side of my desk, was on the right. The Angola file, which I had left open to a specific page, was closed. I told myself that the cleaning crew had moved them, which was plausible. Though in my experience, the cleaning crew did not enter offices where classified materials were present, because the doors were locked with cipher locks, and they did not have the combination. I checked with the building security office. The access log for my office showed no entry between my departure at 6:15 p.m. the previous evening and my arrival at 8:02 a.m. that morning. No one had been in my office. The second discrepancy occurred on Thursday of the same week. I was reviewing audio recordings from the Harrogate case, listening on headphones at my desk, when I heard something in the recording that I had not heard before. After the vocal segment, the "you are not the first" phrase, there was a pause, and then, very faintly, almost beneath the threshold of audibility, another vocalization. It lasted approximately 3 seconds. I replayed it multiple times. The vocalization, if that is what it was, sounded like a single word. Spoken very slowly, the word sounded like, "Marcus, I need you to understand something. I am aware that audio pareidolia, the tendency of the human brain to perceive meaningful patterns in random noise, is a well-documented phenomenon. I am aware that I was primed to hear something significant, that my immersion in the case material had created an expectation in my mind, and that this expectation could have shaped my perception of ambiguous audio. I am aware of all of this, and I am telling you that the recording said my name. I ran the audio through spectral analysis software. The frequency profile of the vocalization was consistent with the other vocalizations on the recording. The same slightly off pitch, the same anomalous acoustic properties. If it was my imagination, it was my imagination producing a sound that matched the physical characteristics of sounds I had not imagined. Sounds recorded on a baby monitor in an empty mansion in New York in 2016, 7 years before I first heard the recording. I did not tell anyone about this. I did not know who I would tell, or what I would say. During the third week, the discrepancies accelerated. My office files were rearranged twice more, both times with no entry logged in the security system. A document I had printed and placed in a folder, a timeline of the 0233 events, organized chronologically, was found the next morning with 2 additional entries I had not written. The entries were in my handwriting. They described 2 incidents I had not yet discovered in the archive, but that I later located and confirmed were real. They were real events, with real file numbers written in my handwriting, on a document that had been in a locked office that no one had entered. I stared at those entries for a very long time. I compared the handwriting to samples of my own. It was mine. I could not explain it. I began to notice that my sense of time was becoming unreliable. I would sit down to review a file and look up to find that 3 hours had passed in what felt like 30 minutes. I would drive home from work and arrive at my apartment with no memory of the drive. I would find myself standing in rooms of my apartment without remembering walking there. These are symptoms of dissociation, and I recognize them as such. I made an appointment with a physician, which I subsequently canceled, then made again, then canceled again. I could not make myself go, because I knew what the physician would say. He would say that I was experiencing stress-related dissociative symptoms, and he would recommend that I take leave from work and disengage from whatever was causing the stress. And disengagement was the one thing I was not willing to do, because I was close to something. The pattern was almost complete. I could almost see its shape. It was during this period that I began keeping a detailed personal log, handwritten in a journal I kept with me at all times. I wrote in it every morning when I woke and every evening before I slept, recording the date, time, my activities, and my mental state. I did this because I no longer trusted my perception of time, and I wanted an external record I could verify against reality. The log became my anchor. As long as I could read my own entries and confirm that today followed yesterday, and that the events I remembered had actually occurred, I could maintain my grip on the rational framework that had defined my professional life. On a Monday morning in May 5th, 2023, according to my log, I arrived at the office and found that Helen Marsh was not there. Her office was locked. Her nameplate had been removed from the door. I asked the administrative assistant, a woman named Carol, where Helen was. Carol looked at me blankly and said, "Who?" I said, "Helen Marsh, my supervisor. She's been here for 31 years. Carol looked at me with what I can only describe as genuine confusion and said, "There's no one by that name in this office. Your supervisor is Dr. Rains." I had never heard of Dr. Rains. I walked to the office that had been Helen's and looked through the narrow window beside the door. The office was furnished differently. The books on the shelves were different. The nameplate on the door read, Dr. Leonard Rains. I tried the door. It was locked. I stood in the hallway and considered the possibility that I was losing my mind, and I found that I could not dismiss it. I returned to my office and opened my personal log to the previous Friday's entry. It read, in my handwriting, "Met with Helen Marsh, Caledonia follow-up. She approved extended site visit. Travel arranged for week of May 12. I went to the personnel database and searched for Helen Marsh. No results. I searched the email system for any message to or from Helen Marsh. No results. I checked the office directory. No Helen Marsh. I pulled the organizational chart from the break room. In the box where Helen's name should have been, it read, Dr. Leonard Rains, Senior Division Chief, since 2014. I sat in the break room and looked at that chart, and I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Not physically, but epistemologically. If Helen Marsh did not exist, then my log was wrong. And if my log was wrong, then I had no anchor. And if I had no anchor, then everything I believed about the preceding weeks might be a construction of a deteriorating mind. But my log said she existed. My memory said she existed. And the files she had given me, the files in the restricted archive that she had cleared me to access, were real. They were in my office. They had physical weight, physical pages, and physical ink. Someone had given me access to those files. If not Helen Marsh, then who? And why? I did not investigate the Helen Marsh discrepancy. I want to be honest about that. I chose not to investigate it because I was afraid of what I would find, and because by that point my fear had taken on a specific and terrible shape, the fear that the investigation itself was the mechanism of my destruction. That each question I asked brought it closer. That each connection I drew gave it more of me. That the pattern I was assembling was not a picture of the entity, but a picture of my own disappearance, drawn in real time, and that when the picture was complete, I would be gone. Like Thompson, like Ellison, like 4 Project Sable analysts, I threw myself into the remaining work with a kind of desperate intensity that I recognized, even at the time, as irrational. If understanding the pattern was dangerous, the rational thing to do was to stop. But I could not stop. The compulsion to complete the picture was overwhelming, and I do not think it was entirely my own. I think the entity, whatever it is, cultivates this compulsion in those who begin to perceive it. I think the investigation is not something that happens to the entity. It is something the entity does through the investigator. We are not studying it. It is using our desire to study it as a means of, arrival, expansion, contact. I don't have the right word because I don't think human language contains the right word. I completed my database on May 9th. It contained data from 19 confirmed incidents spanning 67 years, from 1958 to 2023. The data was unambiguous. Every incident shared the 0233 timestamp. Every incident involved the same visual anomaly. 11 of the 19 incidents included an auditory component consistent with biological respiration. 4 included vocal phenomena. In every case where an investigator engaged deeply with the material, that investigator experienced subsequent anomalies, the entity appearing not in distant facilities, but in their immediate environment, bedrooms, offices, cars. And in every case where the investigation continued beyond that point, the investigator disappeared. I wrote all of this into a comprehensive report. I spent 3 days on it. It was methodical, evidence-based, and scrupulously sourced. It was, I believe, the most thorough and rigorous work I have ever produced. And its conclusion was this: the phenomenon designated wellspring as a persistent, non-localized anomalous presence that manifests across geographically and temporally disparate locations with a consistent physical profile. It is not explainable by any known natural or technological mechanism. It appears to be responsive to, and perhaps sustained by, directed human attention, specifically the systematic analytical attention characteristic of formal investigation. It does not remain in the locations where it is initially observed. It migrates, through a mechanism not understood, to the environment of the observer. The act of understanding the phenomenon appears to constitute a form of contact with it, and sustained contact leads to outcomes that are invariably destructive to the observer. I am now in sustained contact. I have been for several weeks. I expect the outcome to be consistent with prior cases. I submitted the report on May 12th. I do not know if anyone has read it. I do not know if Dr. Leonard Rains, if he exists, has reviewed it. I do not know if the office I worked in is still operating, because after I submitted the report, I took leave, and I have not gone back. I am not sure I could go back. I am not sure the building would be there if I tried. I need to describe what happened between May 12th and today, because during this period events have moved beyond what I can explain or contain. And it is during this period that I have come to understand, if understand is even the right word, what I am dealing with. On the night of May 12th, the night I submitted my report, I woke at 2:33 a.m. This time, there was no uncertainty about the presence in the room. It was not a feeling. It was not an inference. The darkness near my closet door, the same corner, the same closet, was visibly different from the surrounding darkness. It had depth. It was not a shadow. It was a space, a volume of air that had been replaced by something else, something darker than dark, denser than air. It was standing in my bedroom, 6 feet from where I lay. I did not move. I did not breathe. I watched it. It did not move. The silence was absolute, not ordinary silence, but a pressurized silence, the kind you feel in your ears, the kind that has weight. And then, from the center of that darkness, from the space where a face would be if the darkness were a person, I heard breathing. Slow, measured, steady, exactly as described by inmate 09-1147 at Angola, exactly as recorded on the Caledonia, exactly as reported by every